Mic
Hello and
off.
welcome everyone to the Aussie Disclosure News. I am Eilish and
I'm Kelly Jones.
and we're here this morning to just provide a bit of a perspective on Conscious Consumer Network about what's been happening in Australia and with the pandemic, because as many of you know, Kelly and I are from the Victorian state of Australia, where our capital city, Melbourne, has just been smashed with these, corona laws and everything and the backlash and what's been happening. So I guess we're just here to catch you up on things and give you a bit of a background. So, so thanks so much for joining us. Previously, I had a show on Conscious Consumer Network called We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For. So this is a spin-off that we'd like to co-present. So we're really excited to be doing that. So, and Kelly, a little bit about you and what you'd like to talk about today.
Yeah, sure. So I set up the Aussie Disclosure News site 2 months before we actually moved into full-blown disclosure, which is a surprise to most of us who've been doing this for the last 25 years, that we're actually right now in the thick of things. So I mean, I guess being that Melbourne, Victoria has become sort of world famous for its strictest, most dramatic lockdown so far, with stage 5 being discussed for the first time in any country right now. The Aussie Disclosure News has played a bit of a role in updating the Australian public as to where we stand. And yeah, it's definitely a palatable experience of a deep state, fear-based takeover. Very unique experience to have living here in Victoria. So I guess today we'll just go through sort of the headlines with Melbourne and where we're at and just our own experiences, and just update the rest of the world live as to where Melbourne is and what it actually feels like to be in the midst of such a deep state takeover. Yeah.
And it has very much been like that. I mean, we've got such contrasting agendas going on too, with the link that I shared with you last night, the Mark Devlin and Charlie Fried interview that goes into great detail about Trump's triumphs and the takedown of the cabal of A to Z. So do check that one out if you are looking for some extra background on some of Trump's triumphs and how he's gone from country to country. But how does that relate to what's happening in Australia? Because it seems to be that we've got two concurrent agendas going on. One which, we're hearing about these tunnels in Melbourne and we're hearing certain things about that on the underground. And then on the other hand, we're experiencing some of the world's most draconian measures when it comes. I mean, like my family comes from, I'm a refugee background family, right, from World War II. And, when we're talking about Checkpoint Charlies and when we're talking about curfews and things like that, I remember my father talking about things like that in Eastern Europe back in the World War, So, so for us to be experiencing that now, and, as David Icke says, it's like the totalitarian tiptoe or marching towards this totalitarianism. But on the other hand, we've got Trump basically making a lot of the world leaders basically, bend the knee, right?
Yeah.
So
we do. And I mean, Melbourne also has one of the most extensive underground tunnel networks in the world, which most people don't actually know about, the history of Melbourne on that level. I mean, Melbourne used to be known as the wealthiest city in the world based on the gold that sort of built it. And as that got built, this underground network, so it's pretty well known to us, the level of pedophilia and human trafficking that runs through Melbourne specifically, of all the capitals in Australia. So yeah, we're definitely keeping our eyes out on the tunnels. And Eilish, you would know that there's been like a whole pile of, under reports of earthquakes going on through the city of Melbourne. There was one right near you in Geelong the other day. These earthquakes are being really monitored because of the depth of them. They're all sort of coming up at that 10K depth range. And we've also got reports of explosions going off, which I saw last night on Facebook. There was a new one out in the suburbs in Melbourne. So really unusual. A massive reports of helicopter and police action at nighttime. And you would have seen the map. There was a map released the other day of how much nighttime council work was going on in the city, and it just flooded Melbourne City, the amount of things happening at nighttime. So we've got some, although we've not seen actually photographs or anything like this, I mean, the earthquakes are extremely, I mean, who hears of earthquakes in Melbourne?
That's right. That's right. And when we looked at the extent of earthquakes around that seem to be over suspected or known underground military bases, we see that, there's a consistent depth of like up to 10 Ks, that's right, underground. So we're seeing things go off. So when Trump came to Australia, when ScoMo and Trump visited, right, do you feel that ScoMo bent the knee then? Because we seem to have, basically who's pulling the strings, and then Trump coming in with these, if you don't bend the knee, we're going to, basically do some damage. And as that interview between Mark Devlin and Charlie Freak had mentioned, is that every time that he had one of these really important meetings, he'd basically just dump a huge, thick dossier of dirt on the individual and say, we've got it all. Now, what are you going to do about it? And that really, really impressed me. And so although we see the cabal really still making moves, the pharmaceutical mafia, right? We're seeing that still playing out big time with you must wear the masks. I had a chat with Lizzie Rose, who's been quite prominent in the Melbourne community, and she will be coming on. I will be doing a pre-recorded interview with her on Saturday that we'll be releasing later on during the week, and she basically, talks about the amount of airplanes that she's also seeing, because she lives in the flight zone. She's seen so many airplanes coming and going from China. Now, what's going on there? That's been really, really interesting. So we're seeing that even though to an extent they're bending the knee, there's this reluctance. And what we're seeing pretty much now is their last-ditch attempts at, stopping the ascension process, stopping the progress of humanity, stopping us from, living free. And aren't we the most oppressed state at the moment? And pretty much what happens in Melbourne is like a litmus test of what's going to happen to the rest of the world. Because where did the Eureka Stockade happen? It happened here in Victoria, Ballarat, 150 years ago.
Absolutely.
And Ned Kelly,
you can
the biggest, UPU revolutions against the British Empire and all this cabal that started so long ago, happened here in Victoria. This is the site of the Great Rebellion, and this is where they're poking this the most. And there's so many. I don't even have to mention how unhealthy wearing a mask and breathing in your bacteria, constantly is. I just news for people that are really struggling in Melbourne and in Victoria or anywhere around the world who may be watching this. Have a look to see if you can get around it in some way. I personally got myself a medical exemption. So I went to my GP. I have a health diagnosis from childhood about breathing, which is asthma. So that was my, the reason for my medical exemption. But And I'd like to cross over to Biggie for a moment, because Biggie has a video, even if just a small amount, if he captured it for us. And this showed yesterday some footage of a woman who had a medical exemption, by the way, and still how heavy the police have manhandled her, and this was filmed from an upper story balcony. Plus, by the looks of it, her husband was also filming. So, Biggie, I'm wondering if you have that footage and whether you can share that, just to show people that some of the rough handling that's happening in Melbourne at the moment.
The police brutality at the moment is it's outrageous. It's so bad. There's just been so many reports and so much evidence of police not accepting the medical thing, basically if you don't show ID or you have any sovereign rights, the police are basically throwing you to the ground, choking you.
Let's have a look at that. Biggie, if you could please. Thank you.
Hey, mate. Oh my God, are you doing it?
Mic off.
Unbelievable. Thank you, Biggie, for sharing that. And
so we've got a major issue with the police being very brutal with every single person that is basically choosing not to wear a mask. And for us who are aware of what's going on, and in the truth-seeking communities and in the spiritual communities, wearing a mask is a symbol of wearing a false flag on our faces. It's a muzzle, and it's very challenging to want to wear it because it symbolizes such submission to this agenda. And yet, if you go outside in the streets in Melbourne, it is so difficult not to wear it. The police are being so brutal with everyone they see. And the public themselves are monitoring people so severely. Like, really, if you walk down the street, I live on the outskirts of Melbourne, and people who have been basically refusing to wear the mask have been so absolutely bullied by the people around them. And we don't even have a very big police presence here. It is the actual community themselves who are completely and utterly indoctrinated by fear right now. So for me, we can really see in Melbourne the power of fear. And when you combine that with the mainstream media who are just pumping out these statistics and lies, and at the same time, they are literally denouncing any critical thinkers. And we've got to talk about that, because the media have gone, I have never seen anything like it. I don't think I have even seen anything like it outside of the States. The Australian media have gone so hardcore with denouncing any single person who refuses to wear a mask, who has a critical, an alternative attitude, or is critically thinking about what's going on. And we have to discuss, Eilish, the fact that our premier, when he called stage 4 lockdown, and on the second day he's already talking about stage 5, on that time he actually outlawed and made the cure a poison. For 3 months, no one in Victoria can access the cure.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I have found a few things that actually people can take, which is similar to hydroxychloroquine and zinc. And one of the products that I would recommend people, and like no one's paying me for this, by the way, but I'm just saying there's some tonic water, there's a grapefruit skin contains hydroxychloroquine as well, so you know you can boil the grapefruit skin, and some good old-fashioned zinc tablets. So you know, get wise, people. There is also a herb from South America as well that contains hydroxychloroquine, but that might be a little bit harder to source, but people who are into herbs can source them as well. But you know, but good old-fashioned, I love good old-fashioned cures from my kitchen cupboard. That's how I cured my cancer, and so I love the everyday products that we can, you know, use that similar.
I mean, this time really does bring about looking at one's own sovereignty, doesn't it? Because here we are, we're basically in martial law. The police are working for the deep state brutally. We've got the TV and mainstream media denouncing all critical thinking and really making a big deal of basically plastering it across Australia, any dissidents against wearing the mask. We've got a block on the actual cure. We've got all these falsified numbers, and the only ones who have died in Australia so far in this lockdown have been elderly people. There's been these massive reports coming out of the caring of these elderly people in these elderly homes, which have been the hotspots, have been awful. The last news report, I read about it. They were dehydrated. They were on the verge of starvation. They weren't being maintained or cared for. Their palliative care wasn't being maintained. Basically, it was like they were being set up to die, to give the government these false statistics, because no one has passed outside of a nursing home right now. So we've got so much pushing up and then forcing us to wear the masks. And then basically you've got a whole public sort of like in terror right now, even though nothing adds up, not one thing adds up. And I can say, like, I don't believe that the deep state were prepared for this moment. I think this is their last big push towards trying to control the population and basically seeing how far they can push us and what they can, like, where they can get us to as a leading to introducing a forced vaccination. But their story's not holding up. You know, I mean, this is the Great Awakening, and there's lies and illusions that are just like, from the day they started this, has been on the forefront of social media channels. And just before I just want to say one more thing is that I actually, Channel 9 did a poll the other day, and it was talking about the vaccine and blah, blah, blah. But there was thousands and thousands of comments from people who were condemning Channel 9, who were condemning the official story, who were actually standing up and saying, this is a load of BS, you know, like, what about this, what about this, what about this? Story's cracked. I can really feel that, even though we've got fear that's running people's paradigms who aren't awake to what's going on. This story is broken before they've even started. Like, this isn't 9/11, you know, where everyone like bought the official story and no one could believe it was a hologram. Like, this is so different now. Like, no one's buying this.
Yeah. And I loved seeing that, and all the screenshots people took of the comments from that Channel 9 thread absolutely undone them. Everybody's calling it a scam, because if you get a patient that comes into a hospital, say for a broken leg, if you have, you know, or if they pass away from a motorcycle accident, by putting it down as a corona death or a live corona case, these guys are getting more money. So it just makes economic sense that you know, you sprain a toe and you've got a positive corona case. Now, the other thing that people have been talking about is that some of the tests have been tainted, or they've only eventually acquired, the real COVID influenza after they've been swabbed. So, you know, we're wondering what these crates are coming in from China day and night, these planes. Now, this is in a pretty much a no-fly area, and yet Daniel Andrews, Victoria's Premier, is going to Tullamarine Airport personally, shaking hands with no mask with these people and taking
no mask
the cargo.
on.
Now, what's coming in? What is coming in? Now,
Well,
some people say it might be technology, right? Or, you know, and facial recognition, and you know, and it's pretty scary times. It can be really, really scary. Oh my goodness. And we've got, it's almost as if there's like a race to the finishing line, you know, between, you know, all the unsealed indictments now that are coming out, right? That and it's going to happen. It's absolutely inevitable. The bell has tolled. It's game over. You know, it's truly game over. But we're still seeing their last-ditch attempts because there's a lot of money being thrown at this. And I was speaking to Lizzie Rose the other day, who's been called one of the Bunnings Karens, which I'll get to the word Karen in a minute as well. And Lizzie, you know, saying that she's, you know, how she's been targeted and you know, what's been happening with all the flights and everything coming in, because she's right, as I said, she's right over the flight path. So yeah, just for viewers that, you know, we will be featuring a personal interview with her, which, you know, we'll be screening soon. So I guess, you know, when we've got the microchip in the vaccine, that's the big fear, you know, the big patented 060606 mask of the beast, you know, versus these, you know, big corporate takedowns, these CEO resignations, you know, when Trump met with Bill Gates, and Bill Gates basically that day after the meeting stood down, you know, from being, you know, on the board of Microsoft. These big guys are going down because they know their time is up. But there's been a lot of money thrown at it. When I was talking to Lizzie, she said she went to the one of the local police stations near her, and they basically said to her that we are only policing COVID pretty much, right? Now, what he meant was, it's not like, you know, things aren't still going to be processed. I mean, there's still a budget to process general crime, but they're throwing a lot of money. There's a big budget to police COVID, and that's what he meant, okay? So we don't want anybody fearing that police aren't policing, you know, home invasions or anything like that. Well, and there's a lot of police doing an amazing job. There's a lot of frontline workers doing an amazing job and under very difficult circumstances at the moment, you know. But we're seeing people that aren't being excellent in their treatment of each other. When those poor people were locked in those high-rise buildings in Melbourne, not even allowed to come out at their Fitzroy and Kensington flats, when they were not even allowed to go out to get groceries or medication, where everything was brought in for them, including, and by the Australian Defence Force personnel, Army personnel, there was, you know, they were bringing in frozen food parcels and things like that, you know, never mind whether they had halal requirements or anything like that. And yeah, there was stories of, unfortunately, of some of these security guards, you know, having sex with some of the inmates in those high rises. And pretty much
those
what
high rises.
Yeah, you know, this is pretty much
those high rises. Sorry, yeah.
Go on.
Oh, I was going to say that those high rises were a really interesting thing, because when it happened to me, it was like a symbol of what was to come. It was that we know how the deep state has to present symbols before they actually, you know, do what they're going to do, and that's how their magic works, right? So with the flats, to me, were like the symbol of the lockdown that was coming, and the lockdown which is going to be stage 5. When literally these people were like hijacked and forced into their flats with a moment's notice. They had no time to consider it, surrounded by police, like completely blocked, Like, and you know, there's and even with the flats, there was all these contradictory. So Peter Little, he sort of like he sat outside those flats recording every single night, basically. And yeah, as he went, no one could leave, no one could come and go. And he started to put out these videos at nighttime where these flats, which I think probably all around the world, you guys would know what we say when we talk about government flats. They're like these horrible, tight-knit, tiny little grey, horrible boxes with windows that open up only 15 centimetres, and families are packed in there, lots of refugee families packed in there, lots of immigrants. It's really hard. They're horrible. You know, they're totally depressing, and every country has their version of these. But what he started to notice was that whereas when we started, all the lights were on, like everyone was home, like they're full. You can't, these places are completely full. And then suddenly there was like no lights turning on. So it looked like only a quarter of the number of people who were living there were there. So suddenly at nighttime, no one's lights were coming on. And so that begs the question, like, what happened to the people who were in there? What was really going on? And as soon as that finished is when we as this Melbourne city got locked down, and then the state started to get locked down. And we're seeing the Queensland border's been shut. All the borders have been shut, you know, they've locked. And I think the flats are the symbol of what's coming with stage 5. So, I mean, we should talk about stage 5, Eilish.
Which is pretty much full-time house arrest, order your food online and your medication online for contactless delivery, pretty much, you know, order your clothes online, pretty much the whole world basically isolating. And this is the antithesis of unity consciousness, you know, like everybody locking themselves away, depriving themselves of, you know, breathing oxygen and human contact and a basic, you know, hours of sunshine during the day. You know, like like prisoners are given 1 hour of exercise and fresh air a day.
I know.
So are Melburnians right now given 1 hour
off the prison
exercise a day. You know,
we've been modelled off a prison system.
Yep, absolutely. And now with these facial recognition cameras in the middle of Melbourne and also in our regional towns and communities, there's certainly another agenda playing out here, which has nothing to do with COVID. But what I am impressed about, Kelly, because I don't want to be all doomy and gloomy here, is just how much is being done during this cabal operation that's basically undoing them. So this, I mean, I can't see this lasting more than 12 months, because with the unsealed indictment, see, once Trump did, you know, sign his executive order of making the FISA court civilian, and when he can try war criminals, civilians as war criminals, so that he can indict people like Hillary and the pedivores and the Hollywoods and the politics and everyone that has been involved with the highest level, from the highest level down, of child trafficking and consumption of adrenochrome and everything that's happening. We're seeing the systematic shutting down of that. And as you've been, you know, everybody who's awake and, you know, being red-pilled and everything has noticed the celebrities and their emaciated, quite rapidly aged states. They're unraveling, they're putting out little freaky little movies and everything like that. So we're seeing, you know, Ellen is not a very popular person right now, you know, like everyone's hating.
That is Oprah.
And Oprah. And, I mean, you know, with John of God and what happened with him, you know, she promoted him as a holy man, as a healer. And he was one of the biggest child traffickers in Brazil. And when Trump left Brazil, when Trump left Brazil, that was the first arrest they made. So we're seeing that they're not only bending the knee, whether they're doing it voluntarily or under duress, but they're also, you know, basically starting the operations. And I feel that this is why the alliance nations are really coming together. So how successful will Chinese communist, you know, regime be? Ultimately, I don't think it's going to work, because this is going to be undone, because China himself is now aligned with Trump, begging him to help, get the communists out. So this is, this is really strategic war. This is the strangest world war we've ever had, where pretty much we've all been told to stay inside, right? Stay inside. And I'm not a fan of masks. I even if I didn't have a medical exemption, I don't like wearing them for, every reason, every logical reason. But if it means that there's another program going on, the underground rescues, and we are getting more evidence of that, it's coming out, albeit, via witnesses and text messages and things like that. Obviously, we're not getting it from mainstream media, but there are some personnel that are basically now sending messages to friends and family about what's going on. So we're seeing that there is actually something else going on. So we don't want to put Aussies in a huge state of fear, but just observe what's happening. Now, there was a protest planned for Sunday, which kind of fell like a lead balloon in the middle of Melbourne, because the organiser pretty much got arrested as soon as he arrived at the planned protest. But there was a big backlash, wasn't there, Kelly, with people going, no, don't go, it's a trap, right? And then Thanos, the three gentlemen that came on the other day and said, Thanos and his friends said that we really should gather, not 50 people, not 20 people braving not wearing a mask in the middle of Melbourne, facing huge fines, but we need like 100,000 people. And I think we're seeing that a little bit, even with the keyboard warriors, Kelly, with what happened with the Channel 9 News thread, which was absolutely decimated with red pill comments.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the alternative channels have advised people not to attend any protests. We've had a law change in Parliament about the handling of protests, and that happened without anyone's knowledge or approval or voting, of course. I think the feel is that if anyone attends or organizes a protest now, they're going to be used as a tool for denouncing and denunciation. They're going to be taken and used it on the media to condemn, basically, and probably blame the protesters for even more COVID cases. So in the alternative channels, we're being advised not to protest until the numbers are there and we can ascend onto Melbourne City at 100,000 people strong. And I think that what's going to get that movement to happen is taking it away from the conditions of the lockdown, which are outrageous, and we all know what's going on, but actually moving it into the energy of focusing on the children. I think we're going to see, I'm hoping that we see a big push from the alternative stations towards actually protesting on behalf of the missing children, on behalf of the ending of human trafficking and the pedophilia, which all channels to do with this great awakening and this huge disclosure movement leads you to. That is the end game here across the whole thing. And that is why we're in lockdown. That is everywhere that's being cleaned up or that has to be cleaned up or is fundamentally strongly involved in human trafficking is basically is going through a lockdown. And we know that we've got, going down. So we've got two sides to the story here. And, with the Charlie Freak video, which was fantastic, and an overview of watching all the different heads of state submit to Trump, surrender to this process, when he shows them the amount of evidence he has on them. So I can only assume that Scott Morrison's in that category. When Eilish and I started this sort of process in February, I had hope for Scott Morrison. We put out a meme, and it was, he'd only recently visited Trump in the States, sort of the end of the last year, and they had a big state dinner in the gardens of the White House. And Trump and our Prime Minister Scott Morrison, ScoMo for the Australian lingo, ScoMo and Trump seem to have a very connected and close relationship. And I even did some research last night and checked in on that. And Scott Morrison stands very much aside Trump and says that, we share many of the same views, we're aligned really strongly. And up until this moment, the Australian media has gone hardcore against Scott Morrison's friendliness and relationship with Trump. Trump also speaks very highly of Scott Morrison, and they have seen each other a lot in the last 3 years since Trump has taken power. And Scott was due to go to a summit with Trump in September, so in a few weeks from now. So those sorts of signs make me feel like potentially what's going on here in Victoria is a very small fraction of the whole story. And the other curiosity about our Prime Minister is that reports started coming out that I don't know if this came out last year, but his best friend is a massive Q follower. So that is really strange for the Prime Minister of Australia's best friend, close relationships, you can Google it and find articles on this, is a big Q supporter and is a big fan of the alliance and what's going on there. And his wife works with our Prime Minister's wife. So you can only, the amount of sort of evidence pointing towards the fact that Australia is actually aligned with Trump is definitely there. On the flip side, as you know, Eilish, there's also lots of reports standing that are negatively disposed to Scott Morrison in regards to the pedophilia stuff, his background and relationship with the Hillsong and that community. And yeah, so I mean, just like what we're undergoing in Victoria right now, it's just like, which story are you going to focus on? Where are you putting your energy? And where's the evidence actually leading us? So, and in regards to the Chinese planes flying in, there's also lots of reports that they are delivering the Tesla tower parts to transform the 5G towers to Tesla towers as an act of, friendly surrender from the Chinese. So, I mean, of course, we can't validate any of this, but those reports are definitely flying around the alternative channels.
Yeah, how exciting. So there is like this alternative push. And although, and as we see, we've had no true leadership with either Daniel Andrews or with Scott Morrison. Back in January, when Australia was burning, Scott Morrison decided to go on a holiday to Hawaii. And then when he came back, the smoke was so bad at Kirribilli House, he decided to take his daughter, who was having respiratory problems, to Perth, where, on the west side of Australia, that wasn't on fire. So, we saw... It was just absolutely outrageous. And so seeing this inertia, seeing this inaction, almost like watching Nero watching Rome burn, and that's what it was like, followed by, the corona and the business shutdowns and the movement, stopping the movement of people. Back in January, that's my month to go up doing a tour of the East Coast. I do one every January. Couldn't do one this year because the whole side of the state of Australia was on fire. But then as soon as the fire stopped, we couldn't travel anyway because all the state borders have been, shut. And so many... It's been really, really hard on those of us who've, been in Australia and still live here and have made plans to visit loved ones in other states or other countries. It's really put a stop on, a lot of things for the moment. And I really hope that this, can dissipate over the next few months. But realistically, how long do you think, Kelly? I mean, I don't see them stopping this campaign anytime soon. I see that they're going to try and get a little bit meaner, and we just have to keep holding strong. We need to try and use every kind of resistance that we can because we're here to not just talk about what's going on, but also offer solutions. So in terms of legal solutions and and lawyers stepping up. I have seen a bit of an uprising with a few lawyers coming up, and they're talking about human rights. They're talking about how the National Biosecurity Act is the first and foremost top of the legal food chain here when it comes to how to deal with things when we have something such as a public infection hazard going on, whether it is or not. There is like a phase 1 and a phase 2 and a phase 3 and all this. So I've seen recently and more recently a male lawyer as well, basically challenging the law as it stands. And so for people who are researching their own fundamental human rights and what they got to look at, check out the Biosecurity Act, because basically it invalidates any state legislature that tries to override that, because this COVID thing doesn't follow those protocols that would in fact make the National Biosecurity Act actually step aside. So, checking that out is actually a good rabbit hole to go down for researchers if they want to do more on that in their respective states. But that was a really interesting video I saw the other day with that female lawyer talking about that, which was really good. And so, I wanted to mention the name Karen, because originally back in like January, February, March, I guess March is when we started seeing this corona thing really like clamping down heavy. So back in March, a Karen, I have a meme back in my phone that I saved. A Karen at the time was the hysterical one, was the one that, that was, saying wear a mask because we're all going to die, right? And, then someone with the mask packet like in front of them saying this does not prevent coronavirus. Basically saying it's like having some cyclone fence, putting it up, trying to protect your property from mosquitoes, the equivalent. So so back in March, the Karens were something that the truthers actually used as a derogatory term, just as the truther and awake community used the word sheeple. They use the word Karen as a derogatory term for these hysterical germphobic nutters, right? Now, this has all been turned around since Bunnings Karen 1 and Bunnings Karen 2, aka Lizzie Rose, came and basically started using, like walking into Bunnings with no mask. Lizzie, by the way, having a medical certificate and therefore an exemption for wearing one. And just how, she's been handled by the media and also by the community. And by they're trying to relabel a derogatory term that we made up and throw it back at us. The freedom people, the ones that are saying we refuse to be gagged, because in the maxims of law, Kelly, as you know, our silence is consent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so,
I mean, isn't it ironic? We've actually got to the point where they actually have to physically mask us for our silence because we don't consent anymore.
That's
and
right.
Luckily, the amazing thing is, this is ultimately a war on consciousness. So our very attitudes are actually the relevant thing. They cannot censor our resonance. Our frequency is saying no to this, regardless of what we wear. Like, it's a symbol up until you understand that this is a consciousness that they're fighting for right now. That's why they've like pushed this mainstream media agenda so incredibly hard here in Australia right now. I mean, we are as bad, if not worse, as the States right now. And that's a big freaking call to make, there's no one worse than the States on that level right now. So, yeah, I mean, this is a war on consciousness, and that symbol of the mask, it's very symbolic that they physically have to bring it about in actual physical real time to like get our consent. But like, it's not going to work because, our attitudes don't consent, our minds don't consent, our hearts don't consent, our resonance don't consent. the mask is actually irrelevant from that point of view. And it really, and actually, on the topic of the fires, Eilish, like for everyone outside of Australia, I lived in those fires and they were outrageous. They mirrored exactly what happened in Paradise in California. They were absolutely a symbol of the hijacking of our elements. They were absolutely lit deliberately using drone laser technology, the chemtrails, all of that. They follow the exact path of the Agenda 21, Agenda 30 rollout of the new super train. But the thing that happened, I don't know if the rest of the world knows this, is that hundreds of millions of dollars were raised by the Australian public, and they have not given a cent over to the people whose houses burnt. They have literally stolen, hijacked, and not released this money. And that puts most of the Australian charities, the Red Cross, specifically the Red Cross, and the Australian government in a position of basically stealing this charity money from the victims of the fires. Now, Australians know this, are outraged by this, but have done nothing about it. There's been no protest. There's been no big surge of energy going through. So if that's where we stood on the fires, which is very dear to the Australian heart, really dear to the Australian heart. I mean, it broke, and all the animals, I mean, it broke these countries' heart. And we still didn't have the wherewithal to come up and protest against. Australia doesn't seem to have a strong, active protesting voice. We're very lethargic with that energy. It feels like historically, we very rarely do a big push in that sort of, you know, collective, united presence to have our voices heard. Very different from Europe. We've seen these amazing protests going on in Germany and around the world, and you know, hundreds of thousands of people joining. We just don't seem to have that same coordinated collective voice yet.
I truly believe, Kelly, it's because we are, I believe it can be a bit blamed or symptomatic on multiculturalism. Yeah. Because we are such a melting pot that Australians have seemed to have lost our what is our culture? You know, we knew what our culture was back after the First World War, you know, after Vietnam, you know, when we were, you know, when there were surfers and bogans in the 70s and 80s. But, you know, like, what is it now when so much of our population is from other countries and has other cultures and other languages and everything, and they're all isolated and separated and segregated, when assimilation and unity consciousness is what we're all about. And, you know, it's really, really sad, but I guess that could be seen as, you know, symptomatic of multiculturalism as well. Yeah, and what's been going on, because why haven't we been screaming? Why haven't we been screaming? Where's the money? You know?
Yes. Okay. So we don't have a history, right? So the European countries, like, they've been, you yourself and your family have been through these torrential, you know, warlords taking over and laying siege on villages and cities and towns. You've been through that with the wars in so much a part of the past of history. Australia hasn't experienced that, so we don't have that flame to stand up and stop it in its tracks. We don't have the wherewithal, the experience to sort of like come out collectively and say, enough, we are never going down that pathway again, which I think in Europe and Americas, they've definitely got that energy and that cultural life experience that we seem to lack in Australia. So we don't have a solidified protesting voice, which is, for the rest of the world to observe Australia right now, is really interesting. Like, the variables, you know, we're an island nation, you know, we don't have a strong political structure. We don't have a structure that opposes itself. So we don't have like an alternative force. Like in America, you've got the Republicans and Democrats, and they're like, you know, they've got this history like opposing. We didn't have that in Australia. We just have the Labor and the Liberals, who are exactly the same people. We have no strength in our political community. In fact, up until this moment in time, I have cared nothing of Australian politics. I've cared nothing of American politics until Trump came in. This is the first time there's a strong opposing voice. And I mean, with the Australian ones, we've got no political voice or backbone opposing this. We've got,
so we've got people like Franco
got,
Arena and Bill Heffernan, who were the only two senators that stood up and spoke about the parliamentary protection of it's a suppression order protecting the pedophile disclosure about these politicians and about the church and state.
For 99 years, right?
Yeah.
The suppression order. If you are a pedophile in Australia's government system and you are on trial for that, there's a suppression order that means no one can know about it for 99 years.
Yeah.
Like, that is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So all those testimonies that we've heard from, from people over the years, and more recently, people like Rachel Vaughan, who spoke about the corruption in South Australia and the pedophilia there and everything. We've heard from people, of course, on the East Coast as well, which are pretty well known. And, and all the testimonies that came out during not just the most recent Royal Commission, but the Woods Royal Commission. These are all data collection activities by the Jesuits themselves, which is basically the mafia or the heavy hand from the Vatican. But now we're seeing, and it was so delightful to see that by the look of it, the Vatican Treasury has been seized by the US Treasury.
Yes,
so I would like to
saw
see
this.
now some repatriation, if you like, some benevolence funds being distributed,
Yes.
part of Nessera and
Yes.
Gessera, a gold-backed currency, one which these corporate pedophile bastards have finally stripped of all their assets. They're basically, taken. There have been some public, and will be some, there will be some more public disclosure when that comes. In fact, some of the intel coming out now, Kelly, is saying that, and we've been talking about this blackout for God knows how long. I mean, but by the look of it, it seems to be that, New York recently, just in the last couple of days, has had a power blackout, that, that the intel coming from Q or the Trump administration is suggesting that we might have to go dark. We've seen President Trump now, sorry about all this American politics, but what happens in America kind of affects Australia, which is why we're looking at it, because quite clearly, apart from Franco Arena and Bill Heffernan, we've got nobody to represent us,
Well, look, I have to say Pauline Hanson has stood up. I mean, she's a candidate that's been very annihilated in the media for being a racist and, being uncouth. But man, she has said one thing consistently, which is stop selling us out to China. Right now, China owns the majority of Australia's water.
Yeah.
I have a farm and have been watching and lived through the recent drought, which, by the way, was weather modification technology. That was not a natural drought. So Australia went through a forced drought, 3 years. It annihilated the agricultural regions.
Yep.
I personally
Deliberately.
watched farm after farm after farm being sold to China. I have personally witnessed that. And then we had the fires, and now we've got the pandemic. And one thing about Australia that's interesting to observe is that we have got the closest ties to China. Like, it is well known and established fact that Australia's government have absolutely sold a lot of our natural resources and a lot of our infrastructure to China.
Dairies,
Our universities in the last couple of weeks are getting censored. Students talking out against China, particularly on the issue of Hong Kong, are getting censored, and they're getting, they have to suspended from school if they speak out against China. So this whole relationship we have with China, and then of course going back to what you're saying there, the idea that there's going to be some, funding coming through to sort of like, charities and individuals who are going to start solving some of these problems. I can absolutely testify to, because I also have a charity, and I am in contact constantly with this concept and the group of people who are releasing these funds onto the world. It's absolutely happening. There's absolutely massive amount of solutions that are going to, like, as soon as we hit disclosure, like full-blown disclosure, when we have the blackout, which seems to be the only way like that's going to happen. So there's across the world, you know, everyone's sharing the same, finally, hallelujah, the same information.
I can't wait.
We're all the same level. It's never happened before.
Yeah.
So we've got this situation where after that happens and everyone's in shock, then I believe that the funds are going to be released around then. And that's going to go to charities who've already signed, who've already aligned and already sort of presented projects. And and the solutions will start to flood the planet. And I think when Trump refers to having a boom, I love it when he does a boom year next year, I think this is actually what he's talking about. I think this is going to play a big part of what he's talking about. You know, because right now, when we got to mention that the Victorian economy right now, so what's happened with our economy is devastating. I mean, devastating to all the business owners, to all the cafes and restaurants and, you know, all of the people who have spent their lives innovating, sweating, funding their dreams, and to suddenly being shut down twice in a row with the impeding knowledge that we look like stage 5 is definitely, I mean, I don't know how do you think they're going to pull it off, Eilish? Because like stage 5, from what I've heard, is basically like you are locked in your house and you cannot leave for any reason, no exception, which basically ends the economy here in Australia. And the devastation from that perspective is just unimaginable and unthinkable right now. And I think, you know, if you want to say anything about that, but like, it's just as far as the social experience, the crush.
I actually do want to make a few comments, and, you know, as a business owner myself, you know, that's had my business basically restricted because no markets, no festivals, you know, the face-to-face clients have really, you know, we've basically been forced to go online, you know, for readings and remote healings and things like that. The festivals and markets are gone. Big part of our culture, you know, it's a really big part of our culture. And not only in, you know, my little industry, but, you know, when we look at the bigger, larger Australian culture, we're even seeing AFL, you know, Australian Football League, which was birthed in Victoria. It was originally the Victorian Football League. Aussie Rules comes from Victoria. And, you know, it was forced to go to Queensland because Queensland didn't have the harsh draconian laws that Victorian has.
Well, technically, they whisked them away. They whisked them away before the lockdown. They were given the heads up. Yeah.
And so, you know, we're seeing some preferential treatment with people like Danny Minogue being given house arrest and other people being forced to come back from overseas and being quarantined into these shitty motels like the Ridges, which is just like this 3-star, you know, trash heap that people are being forced to go into with windows they can't open. One of the things that we're seeing, Kelly, you know, as you know, is an incidence, and this is why I think, you know, people who do have counselling services really, you know, should be considered essential personnel right now. There's the mental health that's happening, and you know, let's have a look at real COVID cases. Or, by the way, what happened to all the flu statistics? Because no one's got the flu anymore. Everyone's got COVID because COVID actually pays. It's, you know, so someone's getting paid, someone's making money. The other thing is, you know, let's have a look at the suicide statistics in comparison to the flu or the you know, this year's.
Absolutely.
That's where the real tragedy is, and that's where the real, you know, what's really clamping down. From people that are stuck in high rises to people that are, you know, to old people dying alone. Their loved ones cannot hold their hand. You try and restrain somebody who can't hold their mother's hand in a nursing home. Their dear mother, who, anyway, you know, I could really go down that one.
Yeah. But, no, I think we should. The cost of human life here is so, like, forget the coronavirus. It's actually about suicides in Melbourne have quadrupled, even probably more than that. The amount of elderly who are dying alone, starving and dehydrated, deliberately, it seems. The amount of mental health, the isolation alone is really intense. I mean, I've done this by myself, and you know, I'm like, I know what's going on, and I'm like high vibing, and I found it intense after the last lockdown. This next one is like, it's too much. and the concept of the third one. So we can see that, and businesses are being lost and income's being lost and no one has any security or safety, and and schools are being shut down. I mean, the amount of pressures on the human being right now here in Victoria is so intense. We've never experienced anything like it, and there's no way out of it. Like, there literally is this like intense level of stress and insecurity that has, so if we look at this being a tool of division and slowly breaking down consciousness, that is what they've done. And that is the toll that should be on the news every night, that there should be an account of the suicide, an account of the amount of businesses that have closed down, the amount of jobs that have been destroyed, the amount of families that are getting destroyed right now. And then they've locked us down in the middle of winter, where everyone now is trapped inside with no sunshine. They've got no fresh air. They're totally stressed. They're totally run down. They're already stressed and run down from lockdown number 1. So stage 5, if you want to talk about stage 5, it's, you know, we're looking at a very rundown state, a very exhausted, scared and stressed state, a state that has no job security whatsoever right now, who've lost all of their grounding and central security for their family. And, you know, we're talking about coming into a third wave. Well, I mean, my God, we've just hijacked the flu season. FYI, the Victorian flu stats and deaths for these last 2 months are down by like 70%. Like, there's no one in the hospitals and no one is dying of the flu suddenly. Only people are dying COVID. I mean, we've heard all this across the world. We've seen all this. Outrageous. The Australian Prime Minister is about to make today a statement about how, you know, hundreds of thousands of reports of positive COVID were faked or wrong or confused or whatever they're going to say, but they weren't real. But really, the emotional toll and cost on Victoria right now, as we are the guinea pig experiment state for the world, and what we allow happen right now is going to play out across the world. I mean, we're talking about, if they are attempting to get to us to a point where we're so emotionally and mentally exhausted that we actually get sick, which is what happens to the immune system, and then that sickness is probably a flu. And then we move into a space of, well, we're in stage 5, you cannot leave your house until you've had the vaccine, or you've proven, there's door knocking. So they're already door knocking for tests. They're already forcing people to leave the house with papers on them, work papers. The next step, and the army is already walking the streets. Although, Eilish, I have got heaps of reports from people who are living in the CBD of Melbourne, and they barely see any police, which is really, really interesting. So obviously the media shows us a lot of police, and a lot of the activists are getting like brutally arrested. But in general, in the CBD, the police presence has dramatically decreased, like dramatically. Right. So I don't know. I don't know if, like, it's just interesting to see where people are reporting police presence. And I know that a few of people I know have reported that lots and lots of police stations are unmanned right now, unmanned right now. Like, literally no one's answering the phones. So if that is the case, so we, like in America, we've got this whole notion of defunding the police has been put out there symbolically as a huge like movement. But in Australia, we don't even have a police presence right now, but there's been no big like hoo-ha about it. They just simply aren't around where they normally are. They're somewhere else. They're doing something else.
They're doing something else because they're being
stage
funded.
5.
Well, I was going to mention stage 5. So I got this little screenshot from Sky News about stage 5 and what stage 5 might look like. And it says basically, and here we go, guys, what stage 5 might look like according to Sky News. Closing all construction. So there's all your tradies, right? There's all your mortgages. There's all your subdivisions in those new areas around Melbourne, which are the cashed up tradies, all those jobs, all those marriages, right? Essential worker meaning narrowed. So basically you're going to have like AMBOs, cops, firefighters and paramedics and, you know, I don't know who else will be on that list for essential worker. They're going to close bottle shops, right? So stock up, okay. Bakeries shut, shopping once a week only, and that's if you're allowed to go out. No 1 hour outdoor exercise. So the 1 hour that we are allowed now will be ceased. There will be roadblocks, which there are already at all Melbourne exits. So we are already at that point now. The hard regional grid lockdown. So you and I, Kelly, we're in those regional areas of Victoria. We're not in Melbourne Central, but they're going to be doing the lockdowns in your regional area and in mine. And then the taxi shut down. Taxi shut down. So what does that mean? Like, how is your kid going to get home? I guess, you know, I guess the kids are going to have to be home. So that's stage 5. That's what they're basically saying. Like, pretty much you're only allowed to go out for shopping once a week, and, you know, even construction. So if you're building a house, guys, and you're a week from, you know, basically having it, you know, deemed livable so that you can move in, too bad. Too bad. You're going to have to keep living in that shed for a while. You know, there's going to be a lot of pressure. And I mean, how long do they want to put this pressure on the Australians before we fight back? You know, we're looking at the legal channels right now with the Biosecurity Act, right? Yeah. I reckon that's a really big one. There's also class actions. We know that Daniel Andrews is a puppet and that someone else is pulling his strings, and it's Big Pharma, and it's before the pharmaceutical vaccine agenda. So, but we're also seeing the good things happening, and this is why it's been such a roller coaster, hasn't it, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's really, like, if we talk about, if let's like predict the future here for a second from what we know. So, like, they will introduce stage 5 only if they haven't achieved what they need to achieve with stage 4 lockdowns, I'm assuming. And stage 5 will be a model experiment for the rest of the world who's still dealing with a deep state, like, final push. So for me, like, they're only going to introduce stage 5 if they feel like they haven't sort of like captured control of the population enough that we will accept the vaccination. I mean, I'm assuming that's where it's, from the deep state perspective, that's where it's all leading. It's vaccination. Whereas in the States, obviously Trump is rushing to introduce a vaccination that is not the Bill Gates vaccination, and not making it mandatory, just having it there if anyone wants it. So, I mean, can we say that if America gets a vaccine out first, if Trump manages to release his vaccine first, will that vaccine be the one that is then brought into Australia? Or are we just like, we're going to be locked down like prisoners until like the worst vaccine that was always planned? So, I mean, what do you think? I mean, have they already got the plan? Have they already got the vaccine? They obviously wouldn't have rolled this whole plandemic out if they hadn't. They're just waiting for us to consent to it, I guess. It's a psychological warfare we're in right now. Lockdown is psychological warfare. You know, it's nothing to do with health. And like, how long will the Australian public submit to a psychological war? I mean, it's 1984, isn't it? It's a brave new world. It's every dystopian novel we've ever read. We're living it right now. And it's on that level, it's friggin' surreal. You know, to actually watch, you know, the warnings, the David Icke warnings all coming to true and coming past right now. It's just like, wow, we're literally, I mean, and if we look at those books, you know, and we look at the movies that have sort of symbolically outlined this agenda to us for so long now. I mean, you've just got into Handmaid's Tale and all that represents, and we're actually living it. So I predict that we've got 6 weeks ahead of us now with this stage 4. I think that's going to profoundly, you know, exhaust everyone. I think that's the aim here, to exhaust, to isolate, to break down the immune system, to create massive division. In those 6 weeks, anything could happen with the alliance. Anything could happen with Trump and disclosure on a worldwide scale. I mean, this week, Eilish, we have had so many bombs go off. We've had bombs and missiles being dropped everywhere. Like, oh my God, like, and in Australia as well. Like, it's just like all over the place. So if we take that is happening alongside the psychological war that we're all undergoing. So anything could happen to alter the course of where Melbourne's heading. But my gosh, if at some point Melbourne is going to have to say enough, we don't consent. So yeah, I mean, and we're going to have to do that march. And let's just hope that, I mean, we already know this. We know that every time they make a move and push us, 1,000 new people wake up. We know that, right? We know that the energy of this whole movement is amazing because everyone is waking up every single time they try to like shut us up. It's waking up, you know. We know that ultimately like, this is already won.
Yeah, it's game over, guys, you know.
But we know this
playing out. We're just playing out the ugly underside of the belly that they had pre-planned, that they had pre-funded. They've funded the local police so that they're playing their little game now. But what we're really, really hoping to see more of, and you know, this is what we're really holding our breath for is you know, that these underground tunnels, these military bases are actually being taken out. Now, did you see the one in Beirut? You know, when they blew up that one in Beirut, did you see that there was actually an underground tunnel there revealed as part of the rubble? Yeah. So,
and on that topic, they also, UNICEF, horrible, scary, horrendous UNICEF, put out a massive article the next day saying, headline, 80,000 children missing as a result of the Beirut bombing. 80,000 children. Now, of that, there was like 137 people died, something like this. It was so minimal. How have they managed to draw a conclusion that 80,000 children have gone missing as a result of this? Like, that all just sounds so like human trafficking, dodgy. What the hell's just happened there? Yeah,
that just like,
I mean, UNICEF are collecting funds right now to help those children. UNICEF are going down, man. They are going down with the Red Cross.
It's a matter of time. So I guess what we want our fellow Victorians and Australians is not to fear what's happening, just to be part of the process, but resist where you can. Obviously, if you can get a medical exemption, I would recommend one, because the idea of cutting your oxygen supply. Have you seen some of the nurses that have been forced to wear those masks off a whole shift? They've got like cystic acne and blisters from the bacteria all on their lower half of their faces and along their jawlines. Like, there's some serious festiness going on under those masks. Doesn't matter how many times you change them, you know. So it can't be healthy for you. It just can't be. And to criminalize the breathing of oxygen, to criminalize basically gagging us all, like you know, as you just mentioned, I've been into The Handmaid's Tale recently, and just seeing the gagging of those women. But looking at all those kind of dystopian movies and series that we've been watching, that, you know, had these central threads going through them. And even with The Handmaid's Tale, we're looking at what John of God was doing. He was doing breeding programs of breeding women and then giving those children to the elites, whether that be for adoption, sacrifice or whatever, for body parts or whatever. And so we're seeing that there are breeding programs already. That isn't a dystopian, maybe one day reality. That is actually part of the child trafficking, because it's trafficking, human trafficking of women and children. And some of those women are used for porn and snuff films and things like that. Some of them are used for those breeding programs, and they're already happening. Those babies aren't being registered and things like that. So seeing big people like the NXIVM, like John of God, like Epstein Island, like, I mean, you know that Ghislaine Maxwell, she actually had a submarine license as well. She's got a submarine log. It would be interesting not just to see the flight logs to Epstein Island, but the submarine logs of Ghislaine Maxwell as well. You know, who's been coming in that way, or is that how they bring the kids in? Let's see who's on those logs as well. So seeing that she's been caught and what she's going to come up with. I am hearing stories of her singing like a canary. So
yeah, well, I mean, we've got to watch because you know, we've obviously there's been pictures of Peter Andrews, our premier, with Hillary Clinton and holding up "I support Hillary Clinton" badges, and we've also got the insipid Jacinda Ardern right next door to us with New Zealand. And I mean, she's being heralded as the amazing solution and a brilliant leader because New Zealand has no COVID cases. And it was like, but guess who has an election coming up just like America? Yeah, New Zealand. So we've got Jacinda Ardern playing the like, we sold COVID card, we're amazing, like vote for me. And I swear my prediction, as soon as that election is done, it will be back in New Zealand. And New Zealand is an experiment nation just like Australia. And of course, we've got all these reports of all of these big baddies, you know, the Bill Gates and the huge multi-billionaires taking refuge in New Zealand. They've all got homes there. They've all got like hardcore underground homes in New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern, as we know, has been groomed and put into power by the Clintons. She is absolutely not who she says she is. I mean, I watched that very disturbing video, Eilish, of her in her transgendered, you know, waltz down in her red dress, and it was just like watching Michael Obama, like from the Jacinda Ardern angle. So we've got New Zealand right beside us, which is going to be really interesting to watch. And I'm sure New Zealand and Australia right now are coordinating what's happening in Melbourne. I just feel that in my bones. I feel like this is a coordinated psychological move to see how a population, how far you have to push them before they voluntarily accept the vaccine. And then it will be rolled out in New Zealand. Absolutely. That's my prediction.
I really, really hope it doesn't come to that. And I really, really hope that we can also find some legal solutions based on the Biosecurity Act, you know, referring to our most clever people. As Ellen said, we've got to talk to our clever people. Well, yes, we do got to talk to our clever people. Let's talk to these human rights lawyers. Let's see what they got to say. I really like, you know, the Biosecurity Act and how it overrides any state legislature. So I really want to keep an eye on that. And see if we can use that. You know, let's talk about class action. Let's get this happening, because we don't have, you know, a big, brave man like Trump here leading Australian politics. We've got corporate stooges and puppets, men with someone else's hand up there, you know what's talking, and they're just following a script. That's why there's no true leadership with Daniel Andrews, or, you know, okay, I'm yet to see, I'd like to see more evidence about, you know, Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, doing something in relation to these children, when that is actually going to be officially coming out and not just on the underground in text messages and secret messages. You know, I want to see more verifiable, you know, information on that. Interestingly, that a tent city was put up right behind the Kensington flats when they were put on curfew, and Melbourne was put on curfew, and the tent hospital was erected in a park in Kensington Park, just like the one in Central Park in New York. Similar thing, wasn't it? You know? Yes. So I'm wondering what's actually coming out. Why the Neil Mitchell, one of our famous 3AW announcers on 3AW, he was silenced. He was taken off the air. And this is mainstream radio media. Neil Mitchell, who's been a very, very prolific, high-profile political commentator. And he was taken off the air when he mentioned 7 hospitals being annexed, not taking any more clients. Now, that might not seem very strange for those that have been following the hospital intel, like, it's really common for hospitals not to take on any more clients, especially when they're overwhelmed. But these were hospitals with, you know, empty car parks, you know. So we're wondering, you know, there was, you know, more pediatricians being called in and things like that, people specialising in pediatric trauma and specialist care. And so we're seeing that there's a potential to be handling quite a large volume of children. Now, where those children go, you know, where are they going to go? They're going to go into the foster care system. Where do they go from there? Like, I guess there's a huge rescue and recovery and healing operation, and then whether they start out, you know, in hospitals or in schools or in daycare centres or in orphanages until they can all be, you know, repatriated with caring families. I guess time will tell. But this, you know, we got to go through a huge healing after all this, and what's yet to come. You know, see, you've got this really cracking facade of the mainstream media over here, and it's like holding this dam back, and the dam behind it, it's like international child pedophilia ring, you know, the medical mafia and everything pushing up here. And they got COVID here. Look over here, it's just COVID, nothing else happening in the world. You know, mass distraction, mass fear. Let's dehumanize the people. Let's isolate them. Let's put them all in fear. You're all going to die if you don't wear masks. Oh, well, even if you don't believe in them, now we're going to fine you up to $5,000 if you keep breaching the COVID conditions. $5,000. That's going to cause a lot of.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the insanity of the Melbourne fines. So $5,000 if you don't have a mask. I mean, that's just so outrageous. If you there was talks about if you're running any conspiracy like channels on social media, you could be fined up to $10,000. There's like businesses getting fined up to $40,000 for not shutting down. Like the fines in Australia are insane, like insane. And we've got also, I had like on the pharmaceutical mafia concept, like here we are this week, Trump's actually taken the wind out of the pharmaceutical companies in America. He's like, you know, medicine that was like $300 a week is now $30 a week. So, and that's the reason he apparently has gone underground, is because of this whole like taking the power out of the pharmaceutical industry, which I am certain impacts on Australia as well. So, I mean, you know, we just don't really know what's going on. Like, you know, we've got this whole concept of Bill Gates being this like the Grim Reaper, you know, coming onto the planet with his big horrible vaccine and dominating and wanting to depopulate the human race. But like, I mean, we saw that he stood down with Trump. So what if Bill Gates is just like playing out the ruse cards? They all have to, all the deep state, it's already done. They're just playing it out so that the public can see it for themselves. So it doesn't look like Trump's administration has come in with this huge coup and basically taken out every opposing force. That actually, they've actually, you know, making these deep state characters play out their intended role so that the world could see them in action. I mean, gosh. Like, I don't think anyone's going to sit down and say, yeah, I mean, I'm buying Bill Gates' biography. Like, what a legend. I mean, most people now go, oh, Bill Gates. I mean, obviously on the disclosure community, we're just like, oh, boo, Bill Gates. But like, what if Bill Gates is forced to play out his original agenda, but with no actual, like, there's no punch at the end of that? What if like all these governments with all these lockdowns that it's being forced to play the hand they were always going to play, but there's no power in it anymore? The game is already done. There's so much of it. I mean, Trump has taken out the pharmaceutical power. He's done it. It's done. He's done it now. So that is basically eradicates a massive mafia stronghold across the planet. And I'm sure it's only a matter of time before. And he also dealt with the chemtrails in the States as well. He also shut down the chemtrails. And obviously he's got a massive love and heart for agriculture and clean water and the environment, even though the media's like Trump is it's not. He's the one that's actually fixing and cares very deeply about our food chain, about our farmers, about the poisons in those things will become a crime against humanity. And like, I just can't imagine that the end goal that we're all fearing here with this deep state takeover could possibly manifest. It's like already done. It's already done. Like, we've won already. We're just like having to dance around in this delusional, pretend non-consent space. But to me, the war has been won. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and well, yes, I just want to see more coming out, because we're now at the point where, you know, so many people are going, oh, no, this is all just too much, too painful, too much, you know, and we're really looking for solutions. We're really looking for ways ahead. I mean, it was just so outrageous and so timely in its outrageousness that, you know, hydroxychloroquine was made illegal by Daniel Andrews. And speaking of medicines, I want people to check out this one, ivermectin, ivermectin. Apparently, Sky News Australia has mentioned ivermectin as a trial treatment for COVID. So do check that out. Do some research on that. But like, you know, I'm going to be boiling my grapefruit peels and drinking my tonic water and having my zinc tablets if I need it, you know. But, you know, do check out these solutions and look for, you know, other ones, because it's really, really good to see a big daddy boss man like Trump doing the rescuing, right? Like doing the big, you know, going into those meetings we obviously can't go in, you know, in Switzerland, and putting huge dossiers down and saying, we've got everything now, you know, bend the knee. But I think, you know, on the ground, those of us in Melbourne, those of us in Victoria, we're still struggling with our masks and neighbours dobbing us in, you know, if we're having visitors. We can't even have visitors, by the way. We can't even have visitors. So it's pretty full on, you know, and that means, you know, if you've got a home-based business, what, your neighbours are going to tell on you? So it's been really, really tough. So I really can't wait to see more evidence coming out. Australia's going to be a real hard one. I feel that as much as ScoMo, he just doesn't seem to have much leadership skills, I want to see more evidence for the people, because at the moment it just all publicly feels like everything's going against the people. And this is why there's so much despair and fear and hopelessness in the world, and why we wanted to do this show and coming, you know, forward and going further into shows as we go on every Tuesday morning for Australians, is to, you know, come up with these solutions that, you know, look at the positive things that are happening, absolutely talk about the fuckery and what's happening, you know, and some of the ridiculousness, but also looking at the solutions, because without hope, that's like the last light to go out, you know what I mean? And I just don't want to leave anyone disempowered and without hope. So these are, you know, let's empower each other. One of the things that I see moving forward is that because we have been, you know, it's going to take a while for the huge wheel of the world economy to start rolling forward in a positive way again. It's going to be slow moving ahead at start. I think it'll really force people to focus on local community, because that's where we can move around at the moment, and really look at more community-based activities and events and things like that before we start opening those airports. But how's everything from like, look at Richard Branson. He's just declared bankruptcy for Virgin Airlines in Australia and in other. He's basically,
he looks 150. He looks 150 years old right now. Yes,
adrenaline's running out there, Richard, eh? Yeah.
And Tiger Air has declared bankruptcy, and Qantas has said there'll be no flights for 2 years minimum coming in and out of Australia. That basically our option to travel is over. So that sucks really bad. Like, that's really one of the worst things to sort of, like, I mean, Australia's so far away from everything. That really sucks. It makes us feel very trapped. So, I mean, yes, they're bankrupting the airlines. Interestingly, I guess that's happening. Well, it's not happening in the States. So interesting and a good point that they have bankrupt the Australian airlines, apart from the Chinese airlines seem to be fluently passing.
They seem to be flying in and out with no problems.
Yeah.
More to,
yeah, I mean, like, I think it's really
that lead too.
And I think it's really important to talk about solutions. And I just like to share very quickly that, you know, in stage one, like, because I was by myself in stage one, I just sort of went into my meditation really strongly. And that was really amazing. It was very introspective. And I really, you know, utilized this as a sort of a spiritual retreat. And that was really great, and maintain this page. But in phase two, I think because everyone's a little bit more exhausted and worn down, and it's just getting a little bit tougher emotionally, mentally, and physically. I've had to really partner the disclosure work that I'm doing, which is basically full-time, with, ironically, with self-help, positive, motivational speakers. And I've really like spent the last couple of weeks making sure I'm getting a really big balance between the amount of input that goes on with like following disclosure and what's going on. I mean, we're all trapped at home, we're all online, and there's so much input and information, stories, like it's overwhelming more than ever. Like Magenta Pixie calls it the great deluge. I mean, we're in the great deluge of information right now. And you have to balance it with output. Like, so I've just been using this last couple of weeks to really home into my soul's purpose and the vision that I have for my next 10 years. And I've been using these like masterful, inspiring teachers just to remind me to like be as positive as possible, and balancing my input with output. So I've set myself up in a personal painting retreat, and making sure I'm doing that. And of course, I spend a lot of time in my garden. So output has to be balanced. If you are in a state of overload, of too much input, or you are just waking up to what's going on, and this is all brand new, and you're trying to like shove it all into your head really, really quickly, and it's just like, it's insane every step of the way. It's like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like this rabbit hole is so dense and so big, and it leads somewhere freaking horrible. I mean, that's the irony. It takes you down the worst possible hellish pathways, that it's really easy to get depressed. It's really easy to get overwhelmed. It's really easy to get hyper confused and chaotic in your mind, and just not know, when you just have to wake up in your pajamas every day and you're not going to work, like basically to maintain some form of output and routine, it's just getting harder and harder. So I would totally advise anyone who's going through this process and is watching this video, if you're feeling exhausted and drained and energetically depleted and depressed, you need to balance your output. You need to produce something, write something, sing something, paint something, grow something, build something. You have to do something. It's really important, and that is the balance that we have to maintain. That's my words of support and advice for Melbourne.
That really appeals to my Libran sense of balance too, and very much what I've been doing too, Kelly, is you know, utilizing my free time, you know, for music, for art, for the garden. I'm building a greenhouse because, okay, if we're looking at a potential future with food scarcity, then grow some food, you know, like grow some veggies or something like that. Even if all you've got is a balcony and all you've got is a tomato seed, find a pot, plant that seed, and you've got tomatoes, you know, like anything like that, anything little positive that you can do for the day. I really think it's important, because if you start, you know, if you have never researched, you know, some of these keywords like adrenochrome before, it can be a pretty dark place, and be like, oh, I don't really want to live in a place that has that kind of, well, no one does. No one wants to live in a world where that is even a thing. But the thing is, we do. And so what are you going to do with your personal world to make a difference in this world? How are you going to continue to live your soul's purpose? So many people that come into my gypsy wagon, those of you that know I have a gypsy wagon and I take it around to markets and festivals when there was markets and festivals, know that, like, I do a lot of readings, and so many people are coming up to me at the moment asking what is my true life purpose, and so many are coming up like, I'm getting the star, I'm getting the high priestess, I'm getting all these really empowered major arcana cards, leading people to realize that they are, you know, the solution lies with them, with their divine connection to the infinite truth. to their connection with their higher self, with their higher self purpose. So many times when I'm talking to spirit or spirit's giving me downloads, it's basically saying the same thing over and over again, which is, you know, your higher purpose is to live a life of service to others. That we are now in the Aquarian age of service to others. To do a nice thing, give your mum a call. You know, if you can still visit your loved ones, go around and, you know, take over a gift, take over a bag of apples. It'll come in handy, you know. And right now, and visit those isolated people and make a difference in the world with a little, you know, even a little difference. You know, taking over a casserole to an elderly neighbour can really make a huge difference right now. You know what I mean? And so
absolutely, service
grassroots,
definitely
balancing, balance that doesn't poison your beautiful heart and your beautiful spirit and your beautiful mind, you know, because when we are going into our spirituality and we are doing our meditations, we realize the soul in its purity is innocence and purity. It's not to be sullied with these things. And so what we find is that those that have been doing the research and those that have gone down these dark rabbit holes, it's our own inner child losing our innocence by even reading that this stuff even happens to children in the world, you know. And so, yeah, going out into the garden, being around flowers, being around beautiful little animals, being around real children and hugging them and you know, and being good to our neighbours and our friends and our family. That's where this starts. We can turn this around. This will all be over. This can't possibly continue because the game is over. The corporate time is up. And it's just a matter of time till this all goes away. 911 went away, didn't it? And at the time, we were being so repetitively bombarded with this repeat trauma, social conditioning. And the same thing is happening with anybody that is still even owning a television, is turning on and watching the negativity spewing forth from that programming machine called a television. And this is why things like alternative media were born, because and we're seeing slowly some increments of the mainstream media now capitulating and coming over. One of the first things that the Saudi prince did was to go to when he capitulated over to Trump, he was sent by Trump and started working for Trump immediately and started going to those Twitters and Facebooks and Googles and places like that. And basically, you know, showing them the dossiers and the, you know, the best of DVD, the best, you know, child killings that they were famous for. And then basically said, you know, you're going to have to start working with us. And we've seen Fox News and our own network here, CCN, you know, with our history with CNN. Well, apparently CNN now has been taken over by Trump. So I don't think that CCN will have as much problems with CNN anymore.
So I think in Australia we've got Sky News, which isn't on mainstream TV. You have to be on Foxtel or online. But I mean, they're the Fox News version of our medias, and they're really running a lot of reports. Alan Jones has come up very strongly in talking out against the virus, against the pandemic. And on that topic, we haven't mentioned this, but there has been a lot of sort of, you know, a push for this concept of food shortages. And I think stage 5 equals food. I think their final psychological push is within food shortages. And we've seen that they're starting to shut down all the meatworks, which isn't a bad thing. They're starting to shut down all the meatworks. They're starting to shut down, starting to regulate. That's right. This week in Australia, in Victoria specifically, there was all these reports on the avian bird flu hitting our poultry farms. Did you see that? So we've they're shutting down the meatworks, and now they're promoting the avian bird flu into our chicken poultry farmers. And I think they're going to really start. And of course, we've got to mention the flooding that's going on in China right now, which is really, really, I mean, that dam bursting will basically lay siege. It will put China underwater and complete water deluge, which will involve a huge food shortage from the Chinese people. And we've got most of our food is actually owned by China now. So I don't know, they can, if there was that severity of flooding in China and a massive famine going on there, which would be the hijacking of the elements as warned by Magenta Pixie. And then we've got all these notions of Australia, Victoria specifically, food chain being squeezed and becoming disrupted. I think, yeah, a food shortage will be like the last psychological weapon that the Victorians could handle. I mean, I think that would just be, that would be like a real, the last final punch in the gut, I would say, for the Victorian population, if like food suddenly became shorted and regulated and like, yeah.
Yeah, and I can see
so
that
it's just worth mentioning to watch that.
Yeah, I can see that Hunger Games thing playing out, which is why, you know, putting up a greenhouse or even, you know, planting a pot of tomato on your veranda is something that, you know, people should look into for themselves. Or, you know, if they've got a patch of lawn, put a lemon tree, anything, just put something in the ground, you know, get out there
Personal
and
sovereignty.
Start
Personal
having
sovereignty.
independence.
Yep.
Start working on how, you know, how to get bulk veggies in, and maybe, you know, getting jars and getting into pickles and preserving. You know, it's not a bad thing to have, you know, some food in reserve that even you yourself have had a hand in making, you know. So I just really feel that, you know, although there are good things happening, there is still a dark agenda going out, and it's playing out. Their light or their power and their might, I believe, is fading, but we just really want to see us all get to the finish line here, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Me
so
too.
if you're having,
We've
you're
got
struggling,
this, Australia.
yeah, you've got this, Australia. And if you are struggling in any way, please reach out to a loved one. Please, you know, or if you have a story to share with us that you would like to highlight, you know, on Aussie Disclosure News, please don't hesitate to contact the director at Conscious Consumer Network, and they'll forward it on to us. Or check out our group on Facebook, which is the Aussie Disclosure, you know, group. Friendly Australian.
The Friendly Australian Disclosure Alliance. That's a long name, isn't it? But I'm glad I put friendly in there. We're very friendly. If you want to reach out and you need to contact someone or find a supportive space or a supportive group and you have questions or whatever, you can totally join the Facebook page. That is its purpose. We set it up to be a supportive network for those who are going through disclosure. So if that's you and you want to get to know us more or our community, like, you are hand on heart, hearty, absolutely welcome to join and make contact.
Yeah.
You are not alone.
Yeah, we're not alone, because one thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be bringing on some special guests over the coming weeks, and we're going to be looking at more solutions. Kelly, you've mentioned your charity. I'd like to talk to you more about that at some stage in the future, about some of the, you know, the proactive things that you've done to make the world a better place. So, you know, and you know, you'll get to know us and become reacquainted with me as well, and what's been happening since, you know, we've been down and now we're coming back up again. We've seen quite a few of the alternative media people deplatformed. We've seen them demonetized.
Yes.
But as one falls, many more rise up. And I have had a hiatus. I've had my 2 years of downtime because SRA did my head in. And, you know, coming back out and going, right, okay, so I've seen a few brothers fall. It's time to, you know, take this and run with it, because they're not going to be able to silence all of us. They're not going to be able to silence all of us. And there's more ways to, you know.
We're massive.
So we're going to be
huge.
Yeah. So we're going to be using what we can while they are keeping us isolated. Thanks, guys. You've just given me a whole heap of extra hours I can work on informing and empowering people. Thanks, because if it wasn't for isolation, I wouldn't be coming back out of my little cave, you know.
Yay! There's so many of us. We're so great. We're all doing so many amazing things. We have got this, and you are not alone, Australia. We're going to come out of this bigger and brighter and more amazing with no human trafficking ever, ever, ever again. Amazing.
Never, ever gonna happen.
And it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And we're going to know a world without evil in it. Oh, my God. Amazing. It's worth it. It's worth this chaotic craziness just for that. A world without evil. Wow. Amazing.
So I look forward to co-creating this beautiful alternative loving life and reality, and we're going to be co-dreaming this. We're going to be co-creating this. We're going to be doing collective meditations. We're going to be doing things that, like with the Maharishi effect, actually does happen, actually does make a difference. So we're going to be doing things that will make a difference in the world. So with your own spiritual practice, friends and family, continue with your meditations, continue with your prayers, continue seeing a beautiful world beyond this COVID thing. This too shall pass. Keep breathing deeply. Keep working on your spiritual practice. We've got this. And I wouldn't be coming back out if I didn't have hope. If I had no hope, I wouldn't be getting up at, 7 o'clock in the morning out of my pajamas to present anything to you. I'd be like, nah, it's all over. No, but the thing is, we're not defeated. And while we still have air in our lungs and we still have that fire of determination in our bellies, we're going to be here to support you guys and be there to, make a difference in the world and bring to you what is the latest happening locally with a global perspective. So
yeah, man.
Just wanted to go on, Kelly.
Oh, I was just going to say, we have to say it once. We have to say it. Where we go, on we go. Woo!
Yeah.
Coming from Melbourne, Australia.
Yep. And thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in today. We'll be back again next Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. for those of you who are watching this after it has been recorded live. You can tune into us live next Tuesday, Australian time, 8 a.m. for your Aussie Disclosure News Breakfast TV, but also, and yeah, we'll have some special guests on, and we're really looking forward to working with you. So thank you so much for everyone. Okay then.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next
Survive
week.
your week.
Thank you. Right.
Bye.
Bye.
If we were to change the world, we would have to change the media. The sordid state of affairs on our planet is largely due to a misguided, misinformed, and deliberately miseducated mass populace. Public opinion and mindset is largely controlled by the mainstream media. To a large extent, this has been the purpose of the mainstream media from a historical context. Much the same can be said for our imposed educational systems, as both have been developed with the specific intention of manipulating the public into believing and supporting a system of enslavement. It is important to recognize that education and media are inextricably linked. In order to truly affect a massive number of people into moving into a creative and constructive pattern of behavior, we need to change the purpose and effect of media as we know it. Our minds have been enslaved by the mind-numbing repetitive mass media programming that has been put out for consumption by a largely controlled mainstream media global network. Only 4 corporations own all major news networks and the best-selling papers and magazines, and these 4 companies just happen to be owned by a few at the very top, who are all in turn controlled by the CIA on behalf of the Vatican. Much like the educational institutions, we put unquestionable faith in the media and the versions of reality it portrays. Due to the fact that people put unquestionable faith in the media, it has massive influence over people and can affect them in many ways. The effects of media largely influence the way in which we view and interact with the world. There are several recognizable tactics used to do this, such as priming. In some cases, media messages may cause us to recall old ideas, knowledge, or experience. For example, a news story about the French presidential elections may trigger thoughts about the French economy, or remind one of a past trip to Paris, or to pick up some French brie when doing your grocery shopping. Agenda setting, also known as gatekeeping, refers to the fact that the media controls the information we get and therefore what we think. Editors have a lot of power here because they are ultimately the ones who decide what we are thinking about. Then there is framing, which refers to the particular treatment, angle, or spin applied to a message, which often ends up shaping our opinions about current affairs and who the good guys are in any situation. Agenda setting is deciding which story to tell, and framing is deciding how to tell them. Most media messages like adverts and public information campaigns, including news bulletins, are designed to change our attitudes and behavior. Factors that increase the likelihood of success include likability, credibility, or attractiveness of a source, the arguments used, and the people who seem to agree with them. Media also plays a role in persuading people to adopt new ideas or practices. Often, they first communicate the message about the new idea, which then spreads over interpersonal networks, expanding over time to include social leaders, peers, and the community. This eventually leads to the adoption of the idea innovation, reaching a critical mass. In today's world, it is impossible to escape media influence, so what we need to do is to change it, and in so doing, we will change the world.